But I've still got quite a few of the Camelots over there. And occasionally I pull one out and think, God, he was good.
Yes, you were, and you still are.
You could,
Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am with Brian Bolland. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very well. Now, there's some information on my screen which I've got to get rid of because it's right in the middle of your face.
Oh,
so, I don't know whether it's gone. I can see you. Fantastic.
By
the way, could you explain to me firstly how I pronounce your name?
It's Duy.
Duy.
Yeah.
And your last name?
It's Tano.
Tano. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the way it looks in writing.
Oh, you know the figure skater Brian Boy Tano?
I've heard of him. I've heard the name.
So if you take his last name and then you just change the B to a D, then right. Very quickly, that's kind of how my name is pronounced.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very Filipino name.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I thought Filipinos had sort of Spanish kind of names like, Jose and things of that sort. Isn't there a Spanish connection?
Well, that's funny because my full real legal name is Jose.
Is it? Yeah.
But
were the Philippines a colony of Spain or something?
Well, this will answer your question from before we started recording. The Philippines was a collection of city-states that had Malay influence, Arabic influence, and then from the north it was mostly China and the northern parts. And then we were colonized by Spain. Not by Magellan because we killed him. Magellan died here. And then the next wave of Spanish conquistadors came. And then that was for around 300 years. And then the Americans came and then they colonized us until World War II. And then the Japanese colonized us. And then the Americans came back and got rid of the Japanese. And ever since then, we've kind of had this friendly relationship with America.
Yeah. I think a lot of people supposedly have, don't they? I think we supposedly have too, I think, don't we?
Yes.
You have flawless English. Is English your second language or what?
I learned them both at the same time.
So you Tagalog, is it? Tagalog?
Yeah, Tagalog. Yeah, I learned them both at the same time. But I voraciously consumed American cartoons and
yes, of course.
Wanted to be a voice actor. And that's the reason I give for
having a flawless American accent.
It's the reason I give.
By the way, this is going to be an interview of you. It's going to be a history lesson and a fascinating interview with you. But
you are. So you said you've never been here, and I said that if you ever came here, there would be lines upon lines waiting to get your signature.
Well, I haven't been to a convention of any sort for quite a few years. Obviously, not since the pandemic, but even before then, it had been quite a few years. But I am going to one in Bristol, in the west of England, in May. So I really can't remember what it's like being at a convention. Whether you get lines of people or know what you have to do for them.
The last times you went, were you still getting lines of people? Because I imagine that you do a lot of appearances probably in England.
I did for a while. I had, I guess, 8 to 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of conventions. I did one in Mexico, which was great fun. I've done a couple in Singapore, but that was quite a few years ago now.
Oh, that was so close. I should have flown over.
Yeah. That was 2007, I think.
Oh, I wasn't here. I wouldn't have been able to fly over.
Okay. Where were you?
I lived in the States for 5 years.
Oh,
I came back. Yeah. I came back in the middle of 2007. But
yeah.
But yeah. But why do you love comics? Like, what was it?
Why do I love comics? Well, for exactly the same reason, and I'm sure you can copy and paste this from virtually any comic artist. They read them as a kid, and I just happened to have taken from the drawer the very first comic. I don't know whether it's getting a bad reflection or anything.
Oh wow!
I'll take it out of. This is the first comic I ever bought in 1961, I think.
Is that your copy of the first comic you ever bought, or did you rebuy that?
Well, I've got to own up. When I was a kid of 10 or so, here you can get a little closer there. When I was a kid of 10, I used to keep my comics in a stack, sort of going vertically like that. And this being the first was at the bottom, so it got wet, and so the actual original copy of this had got damaged. So I did actually have to reacquire this one. Well, back in the 80s, I guess. But this is and the interior was by a fellow called Jesse Marsh. Not a well-known artist, but anyway, yes, I got into. I love dinosaurs, and I got into comics, American comics, from the early '60s onwards, and acquired a large collection of mostly DC comics.
Why was that? Was it just better distributed than Marvel was, or?
I think I was very tuned into the sort of aesthetic of the look of the comics, the art. I was very much more a fan of the artists than what was going on in the stories. I was mad keen on Gil Kane, some of the other Murphy Anderson on the Flash, and so on and so forth. And I was very tuned into a specific kind of graphic look to the comics. So when Marvel came along, they seemed a bit sort of shoddy, the sort of the very earliest Marvels. Of course, if I had them today, they'd be worth a fortune, wouldn't they? But I bought a few Spider-Mans. Later on, as a sort of, almost as a professional, I got into later Marvel stuff with Howard. I loved Howard the Duck and Conan, especially the black and white Conan, inked by Jose Ortiz, who I believe was a fellow countryman of yours, wasn't he?
I'm not sure about him, but Alfredo Alcala was.
That's the man. Yeah. Alfredo Alcala. Yes, Jose Ortiz. Anyway, yes. But I was mainly tuned into the look of the DC. And I had complete runs of Green Lantern, Atom, Flash, and so on and so forth. Yeah. I
can see that, because when you draw, your style is very clean, very precise, anatomically, technically correct. And that's true of a lot of 60s DC artists, Kurt Swan, Carmine Infantino.
Yes, yeah. Murphy Anderson was, I and another lad of my sort of age, we were fans, and we used to do the amateur versions of, fanzines and drawings. And he was very keen on Murphy Anderson. It's very clean. Yeah. Murphy Anderson was not a dynamic artist in the sort of Marvel mold, but he had a very clean sort of ink finish, didn't he? I don't know whether you're familiar with people like.
I saw on Cartoonist Kayfabe that you put up a recreation of a Carmine Infantino Flash that you did when you were 14, and when you've seen that. When you put it up, I was like, oh, it's a print of that Carmine Infantino comic.
Oh yes. Was that in a podcast? Was that in something you saw on? What was that in?
Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Yes.
I think you did it maybe a few weeks ago, a month ago or something.
Yeah, I think I did. Yes. Yeah. That's right.
And you put it up, and I thought, oh, it's a print of that cover. And then you said that it was your recreation of that cover, and I said, no way.
Yes, done when I was about 15. In crayon, really, in sort of ballpoint pen and crayon.
That's incredible. When did you realize you wanted to draw comics?
Well, I was drawing comics all the while I was a fan, and I was collecting them, really. I was drawing them with my pal Dave Harwood. And you gradually move into the fanzine world, the world of the comic fans. And we had a convention in London where most of the people who later became either artists or writers or shop owners or editors were at the convention. And it seemed to be, it was a whole sort of world in the early 70s, I guess, and then I became aware that it was a profession. You could actually do it for a living. And that's where Dave Gibbons came in with me. Dave and I became good pals, and we started working on something together professionally. Powerman.
Was it Powerman? Yeah.
Yes, it was, for Nigeria. A comic.
Nigeria. What was that like?
I mean, it was bloody hard work, I'll tell you. I mean, I as a kid, and I spent 5 years as an art student, sort of doing graphics and typography and stuff like that. And I could turn out a page a week when I was a student, but when you work professionally and you've got to draw 15 pages or so every 2 weeks, it was very hard work. You know, you realize that you just don't have time to sleep. You just got to get this stuff done. It was, I mean, exhilarating because, you know, it's the first time I'd actually been paid to do this sort of thing, but it was very hard work because the pages had to be turned out at quite a speed.
I know you work as a professional illustrator, you know, for not just for comics, and of course you do a lot of covers. In my line of work, I work with a lot of advertising agencies. I don't work for an advertising agency, but I work with a lot of advertising agencies. And I've always wondered, and maybe you're uniquely suited to answer this, but given how much advertising agencies pay, why does anyone still do comics?
Well, I wouldn't know. I've not worked in advertising. I mean, right at the beginning of my professional, I mean, when I left college.
Or illustration, or professional illustration, like pinups.
Yes, I see what you mean. I mean, when I left college, the first work I did before comics was work for advertising work. And I suppose at the time it was fairly well paid. This is back in the 70s. But the thing I disliked about working in advertising is that imagine me as a sort of young 20-something-year-old. I do my work on a piece of board and I put it on the back of my bicycle and I cycle to the advertising agency. And there's usually the person who's commissioned me, their job is to tell me what's wrong with it and tell me that I've got to take it away and change it. And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be doing their job. So I got so pissed off with having to work out some way of altering artwork that I've had a phobia of when I put a piece of work, send a piece of work, I have a phobia of them saying, yeah, it's okay, but could you just change that bit there or that bit there? So that is one reason I'm not attracted to advertising. I really don't know anybody in the advertising world nowadays.
Did they ever tell you to make the logo bigger?
Well, fortunately, as a comic artist, I was never required to do the logo. That was usually someone else's job.
You've mentioned that you went to art school, and I believe you've mentioned in other interviews that you got a B in art and an A in technical drawing. So that tells me two things. One, your art teacher didn't know stuff, and then but the other thing is I can totally see why they would award you for technical drawing, specifically because your line is so precise.
Yeah.
But what does it feel like knowing that you made it as you're one of the most loved comic artists of all time? And
oh God, really?
This guy.
Well, let me say this. When I was at school doing A-level art and all this sort of thing, and then I spent 5 years, well, actually, yes, I did spend 5 years in art schools. No one in the art schools knew anything about comics at all. So I got no guidance as to how to draw comics from those people. I did spend the final year where I was able to spend the whole year producing my own one-off thing called Suddenly at 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't think we were going to be talking about it, otherwise I would have found one. But okay. I did find a tutor who did know a bit about comics in 1973 and accepted me on the course because we had this affinity. And I've forgotten how your question was phrased at the beginning, but how does it feel?
Yeah, like
I mean,
looking back on that.
My evolution as a comic artist was completely independent of any any help from outsiders. So it doesn't really come as a surprise, you know. If I'd failed, that wouldn't have been a surprise either.
Yeah, speaking of that, you know, you've mentioned your early influences. How did you, you know, add on to that list of influences as you went on to become a professional, you know, from when you were a kid to onwards? Like, who's on that list, right? Like, that you kept on going back to?
I mean, all through life, any artist is his or her eye is always trained to spot anything of interest. I mean, at the beginning, it was all the artists of the time. It was mainly DC artists. I liked John Buscema quite a bit. But studying art, you just come into contact with just about every artist anyone's ever heard of. And now I'm mainly a cover artist. I'm working in single images most of the time. I could draw from, there's a little sign that keeps coming up saying you're about to raise your hand. That's fascinating.
Can I do that?
I knew that. So, I mean, there was a period when I was being influenced by the covers of Vogue magazine. And when I was drawing Wonder Woman, I was looking at pictures of beautiful models, trying to get a beautiful face on there. And I realized that the photographers they use have a language of their own, and you sort of incorporate things of that sort into your own work. So all sorts of people. I mean, there have been direct swipes from artists whose names I can't even remember. There was an artist called Fusilli, who was a Swiss surrealist printmaker. And I've swiped an image from him at least twice now. So the influences come from all over the place, endlessly. I
have to ask this question, being me. Who's your favorite Filipino artist?
Oh, Nestor Redondo.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see that.
He was Filipino, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. No longer with us, I believe, is he? No.
No longer with us.
I was astonished. In the very early 80s, there was the so-called British invasion. You know, I and Dave Gibbons and Kevin O'Neill and various people all sort of swarmed over there. And Alan Moore, of course, took the whole comic world by storm. But before that, there was a kind of a Filipino invasion, really, wasn't there? Yeah. In the early 70s, I remember as just a student and a comic reader, Nestor Redondo was drawing Swamp Thing beautifully. I liked his work easily as much as Bernie Wrightson. Wow. But I loved Alex Nino. In fact, one of my all-time favorite stories was called Repent Harlequin Said the TikTok Man, which was in a Warren comic called The Rook. Are you familiar with that one at all?
Yeah. The Rook also
it was written
published
by Harlan Ellis.
Really? Well, I was going to say, yes. The Rook also published Alfredo Alcala's Voltaire.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah.
And the only time I've ever written a fan letter to a comic book was about how much I loved Alex Nino's work on DC at the time, in DC. And he was drawing a series called Carib or something. It was about Caribbean pirates, and it was a backup story, a short backup story in another comic, the name of which I can't remember, one of their sort of 70s mystery books.
Yeah, it's one of those horror mystery books.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And I was amazed to discover he's still with us and still producing fantastic work, isn't he?
He just released his last ever work. He announced that it's his last ever work. Of course, he said that about the last thing he did before that too. So
really, where does he mostly work then these days?
I know he lives in California, I think.
Oh, does he?
But the last ever work he did is a local comic here. I think Paul Gravett actually had a post on Facebook about it, saying that he would order it in bulk for anyone who wants in England.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got a copy of Satan's Tears, which is his book, isn't it? And
yeah,
I think it's fairly rare, isn't it? Do you have one of those?
I don't have that one. Nor do I have, and I really want to read this just because of the title. God the Dyslexic Dog.
I've never heard of that.
That's one of his.
Fantastic.
God the Dyslexic Dog. I'm like, okay, I'm in.
Okay. Does he write the stuff himself or what?
The one that he the last one that he did now, it's called Alandal. It was written by a guy named J. Ignacio. It's his first comic, and it's Alex Nino's last. That's insane, I think. Yeah. I know. I notice in your work you do a lot of your rendering is feathering and hatching. Where did you pick that one up? Because I don't think that people like Kurt Swan or Murphy Anderson in particular were all that well known for it, you know?
No, it's true. That is true. I don't know where that came from. When I first started working professionally on Powerman with Dave Gibbons, I had to decide what tool to use to do the drawing, and I think somebody recommended I use a brush. So all of my work up to the late 90s was done with a Winsor & Newton brush. And the tendency with that is if you press a little harder, the line thickens. You've got to somehow work out how to give the impression of a rounded form. And once you sort of lock on to a kind of a way of doing things, and you've got to produce things fairly quickly, you tend to lock on to the same way of doing it. And I don't know why that seems to have become my thing. And I'm left-handed, so the lines tend to go top left to bottom right. Also, I tend to always have the shadow at the bottom. The light comes from the top left, so I don't really have to think about lighting anymore. Interestingly, at 2000 AD, after I'd left to work at DC, Cliff Robinson came along, and I think somebody must have said to him, draw like this guy Bolland, because we quite like his style. And Cliff looks more like me than I do nowadays. Yeah, I don't know whether you're familiar with his work on 2000 AD.
That's funny.
Do you get 2000 AD in the Philippines?
We do in limited print numbers.
Yeah,
I think we have to special order it. Yeah, but we would get the collections though.
Yes, of course. Oh, great.
So you broke in at the same time as Dave Gibbons. What was your friendship like? Are you guys still close?
Oh yeah, I would say we're great pals. We don't live close to each other, and we keep threatening to see each other every year.
Threatening.
And I think the last time we saw he and Helen, his wife, came here to this very room before the pandemic, I think it was. Yeah, we're generally pretty good pals. Yeah, he's a very good spokesperson for comics because he's a good talker. He tells great stories and talks incredibly intelligently about this stuff we do. And he's successful thanks to Watchmen and Kingsman now, which is a terrific series of films, isn't it?
And Martha Washington.
And Martha Washington, yes, with Frank Miller. I used to know all these people. Frank, I used to know Frank rather well. He came to visit me in London a few times.
Do you guys go out drinking or with you guys? What's he like?
When Frank Miller came to our flat in London, I was always because of these long hours I had to work to get the work done, I was very nocturnal. So when he came over with his partner at the time, I took them around the East End of London in the dead of night to where the Ripper, Jack the Ripper lurked back in the 1800s, and we kind of lurked around in the dark together.
Seems kind of macabre, but also fun.
Oh, it was great fun, yes. And I think we met up a few times in New York.
When you and Dave were working on Powerman, were you collaborating? What was that like? Was there some competition going on? Or
No, there was no competition. Let's see. No, there was no. We met a few times in the art agent. The art agent that hired us to do the job was called Barden Press Features, and they had a lot of contacts. The name was a conflation of Barcelona and London, and they had they provided a lot. They had contacts with the Spanish artists and the artists in around Europe to work in the British comic field. That's how Carlos Esquerra, for instance, who created Judge Dredd, came on the scene. And so we had sort of get-togethers, but also later on we had a monthly Dave Gibbons, Kevin O'Neill, Mick McMahon, and I, occasionally Alan Moore. I think one time Barry Windsor-Smith joined us. We had pub nights and pub and pizza nights, and we'd sort of sit there talking about stuff and what was going on. Also, I remember Dave showing us early samples of Watchmen that he was working on, and sort of bubbling with enthusiasm at this wonderful thing he was working on.
What was it like being there for Watchmen? You know, seeing those pages, because I hear stories about how, you know, the American comic creators, you know, once Watchmen came out, it started intimidating them. And
we were aware that Alan was a terrifically talented writer much before then. His writing in 2000 AD and for Warrior, you know, what were they called? DR and Quinch, I think. Was written. Oh no, that was Steve Moore, I believe.
No, DR and Quinch was Alan.
It was it? And the Bo Jeffries saga.
Yeah.
So Alan's brilliance was just shining in all the fields he worked in. So it came as no great surprise that he did something as good as Watchmen. I would imagine that it did rather send a kind of a seismic shock through the superhero world in a way, didn't it? It sort of reinvented the superheroes to some extent. And I think you have seen occasional examples of how superheroes have been reimagined to some extent since then. But it was a very exciting read.
It's an interesting thing because you know, I believe that you can't just remove an artist from a writer for any book, right? Like, if anyone else had done Watchmen with Alan other than Dave Gibbons, I don't think it would have been the same. Yes. Or except if I were to play that exercise, the name that comes to my mind that would have been able to kind of get it in that on the same playing field is you. Yeah. Because I feel like you and Dave have a very similar, your art doesn't look the same, but you're both very precise, and you're also very subtle in the way that you execute your panels.
Oh, yeah. Somebody said that to me. I mean, there was, I think on Facebook, somebody said that they would have liked to have seen me doing Watchmen. And I said to them that if I had been drawing Watchmen, I would still be working on finishing it. Because I'm so slow.
So would you say speed is your kryptonite?
Yeah, speed. Yeah. I mean, now I'm supposedly retired. I can take as long as I want on I was drawing a Swamp Thing cover recently, and I spent well over a week drawing it.
Okay.
But yeah, now I have the luxury of taking as long as I want and doing as little as I want, which is great.
I have a question about that, because I feel like in the last, I want to say 20 years, in the last 20 years, with the whole shift in the industry, I feel like the monthly title, the need to meet deadlines, is not as important as it used to be, because before you had to meet deadlines, that was the cash flow. But now that things get collected, I feel like anybody who needs to take their time actually can take their time.
But surely they are collected editions of comics that came out monthly, aren't they? Yeah. So they would have had to, aren't they?
I guess so. But I guess if you're doing an original graphic novel, it would be.
Well, I guess a graphic novel. I mean, one of my absolute favorite artists is Jim Woodring, and I love his work. It's so strange. And I'm sure that he just brings out a book whenever he's finished it. That's the way most artists and writers work. Only we in the world of comics have to work like hell on a regular basis, on a sort of weekly, monthly basis. Although I don't do that anymore. I haven't done it for ages. You know, I haven't drawn any interior pages for quite some time. So I can't imagine what it must be like for a real comic book artist.
I'm gonna move back to Powerman and
Oh God. Okay.
ask you, I know that was a comic that was meant for Nigeria. Did you guys get any feedback from, you know, the country of Nigeria about it? No, not at all.
Not at all. No, I mean, in those days we did the work. We were paid something like £17 a page. The artwork disappeared into goodness knows where. We got copies of the comic. I've still got them here, but I never. Well, I'm going to bring up an exception at the end of this little story, but no, I didn't get any feedback from the publishers or from anybody who read it. Well, there were a couple of side stories. Apparently, it was then resold in South Africa, I believe, and it was sponsored by a tea company, I think, and somebody was given the job of painting cups of tea in the hands of Powerman, so that after his superheroic deed, he was seen complimenting this particular brand of tea while holding up the tea. But somebody said that it was a racist comic. I don't know whether the content of the stories didn't change, but it was. I did read it in the Comics Journal or something about this racist comic in South Africa. But anyway, I had nothing to do with that. Now, the end of this story is that I was at a convention in London and a young woman came to me and said, I'm from Nigeria and I loved Powerman when I was a girl. And so that was a real lovely treat to hear actually somebody say that.
That is very cool. Like, you don't hear a feedback about this comic for decades, and then all of a sudden you get that. That's very cool.
Yes, it's lovely. Yeah.
Why do you think Judge Dredd is so popular in Britain, but not quite so much globally? Like, what is it about him?
Well, I suspect that not everyone in the world understands irony. I think there's a lot of irony in Judge Dredd. One American colleague of mine said that he just didn't like Judge Dredd because he was fascist. And in a way, that is the point of Judge Dredd. If you know your superheroes, you know your good guys and your bad guys. But in the case of Judge Dredd, it's difficult to know what moral position you take in the story. Are you on his side or are you on the side of the crazies that he's dealing with? And if you can't take that sort of central position of just not really supporting him or identifying him and seeing him in an ironic light, then you're not going to get it. Do you suspect that might be the case? That you take one look at Judge Dredd with his eagle on his shoulder and his SS sign in his glasses and the lenses of his visor, and you think he's a Nazi, and it would really put you right off.
But he's purposely over the top.
Oh yes, he's purposely over the top, sort of fascistic police state. There's got to be a word for that, isn't there? But he's a facilitator of a police state.
Yeah.
But then to counteract that, the crazies that he's dealing with are also extremely dysfunctional. You know, the people, the League of Fatties, the culture, the ugly, the Otto Sump's ugly agency, where it's fashionable to be hideously ugly. It's just rather ridiculous, and I'm not sure that kind of ridiculousness goes down so well in American superhero comics.
No, I think at the risk of getting hate comments for what I'm about to say, I feel like a lot of the American audience needs satire spelled out for them.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I'm trying to think of something that is comparable. I remember American Flag had a certain sort of People
Yeah.
couldn't work out the sort of politics of that. And there have been a few other Lobo, but then Lobo was a British character, really. He was created by,
Yeah.
who was that? Simon Bisley
Simon
drew
Bisley.
it.
Yeah.
Who was the writer of that? Was that?
Keith Giffen.
Oh, was it? So an American. Okay, good.
I believe so. But I mean, Keith Giffen should be your first. If it is Keith Giffen, I'll have to look that up. If it is Keith Giffen, it should be everyone's first sign that Lobo is meant to be a funny character and not a serious character.
I mean, he did ambush. I can't actually say ambush book because I'm from the north of England, where we pronounce our U's very flat, and so I would say ambush book.
Oh,
bug. I can't say bucketful. Well, I've just said it, but to me, I would have to say bucketful.
you'd have to make the effort.
Yeah, in the north of a certain line in England, we pronounce our U's. We catch a bus.
That's interesting.
And not a bus.
Well, in Filipino, it's bus. So.
It?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're brothers.
Yeah, the Filipino word for bus is bus.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Keith Giffen drew Ambush Book.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
He did. Yeah.
You got on Judge Dredd with Pat Mills, right? Cursed Earth. You were one of the artists, or did you get on it?
Yeah,
before
I did some episodes of Cursed Earth. Yes, that's with Mick McMahon. He did most of it, I think.
That is, according to some Dredd fans, that is the point where they felt like Dredd was really picking up, clicking. Did you feel it at the time as one of the artists?
I'm not sure quite when. I mean, when I first started on 2000 AD, Judge Dredd was not really seen as the lead character. He didn't make it onto the cover for quite a few issues. And I didn't draw him on a cover of 2000 AD for quite a while, until the Jolly Green Giant story in the Cursed Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I was never really, I mean, these kind of commercial forces are a matter for the publishers and the editors. As an artist, you're really concentrating on trying to improve on your work. And I was never really aware, really outside of struggling to get my paintbrush to work, of just how popular Dredd was, other than the fact that there seemed to be more and more annuals of Judge Dredd, and I was being asked to draw him at conventions more and more. But yeah, he's probably Britain's longest running sort of non-comedy comic character, isn't he?
So you just gave that to avoid saying the Beano, right?
Well, yeah. No, I'm thinking, I mean, we've got Dennis the Menace.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Characters oh God, I didn't read the Beano as a kid. I never had comic, the Dandy and the Beano and the Topper and Hotspur and all those other things. I didn't have them. My first comics were American comics, so I didn't get into all that. So I can't really remember the names of those characters.
That's interesting. You resonated more with American comics than British comics.
I didn't know anything about comics. Okay. In the late 50s, my father heard of a thing called Look and Learn, which was a sort of paper for boys, basically, that had a lot of history in it and geography, a lot of text, but also it had a few pages of very nicely drawn comic strips. Don Lawrence's Trigon Empire, I think, was in there. So that was one encounter I had with British comics early on, but I plunged straight into collecting these American comics big time. But at the same time, and you may have read this somewhere, I discovered two newspaper strips in the British newspapers, Jeff Hawke by Sidney Jordan and Carol Day by David Wright. Jeff Hawke was a science fiction space suited character, and I loved it. I absolutely loved that in sort of 63, 64 sort of period. So that was so I still do kind of straddle the American world of comics and the British and European world of comics to some extent. Yeah.
It's funny to me that you said you didn't know where funny not haha funny, but like strange funny, that you didn't know when Judge Dredd was making it big, because you drew arguably the most iconic Judge Dredd panel of all time, which is Gaze into the Fist of Dredd.
Yeah, that's good.
So did you have any clue at all as you were drawing it that thing would get reprinted, posted, shared on social media so many times?
No. I remember thinking the story was good. I loved that moment in the story. And I mean, on a purely technical level, the drawing with a brush in ink was always a struggle. The ink was sometimes too thick or too thin. The point of the brush didn't come to a point, and sometimes it was more of a struggle. But while I was drawing those pages, the work was flowing beautifully. And I remember really enjoying, I even have a page here actually. If you give me a moment, I've got a couple of pages here. Not for this is from a later actually. Wait a second. There you go. I think this was the very last. I don't know whether it's coming on the screen very well, is it?
It's coming along really well. Look at that, all that chiaroscuro. That is the technical term, right?
Yeah, that is the word. Yeah. This was from the last Judge Dredd story I drew. This is the artwork here. So I was really enjoying the fact that technically it was all going very nicely. And I've forgotten exactly what your question was, but
well, technical question, because you showed me that last page. How hard is it to draw rain, and does it ever get any easier?
I was asked, somebody on one of these podcasts asked me how difficult it was to draw the puddles at the beginning of The Killing Joke. And we had a whole discussion about drawing rain. No, it's not hard. You just get a kind of metal ruler or something, and you just draw. Do you want me to hold it up a little?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things you can do when you're actually working on paper like this is if you're drawing rain, you take a scalpel and you run it down the edge of a metal ruler, and it sort of snags a little bit of the paper and pulls the surface off, and that can give the impression of rain.
That's very interesting.
I can't see much of that on there. Whole conversations about drawing rain.
Did you, considering that there was a rotating cast of artists for Dredd, was there much back and forth between you guys? Were you communicating with each other, coordinating scenes?
No, not really. I mean, not really. I never ever spoke to John Wagner or Pat Mills. Almost never. The script was sent to me, and I would just sit down and do it. I was never told how, I was never given advice on how to draw it other than what was written in the script. But there was some discussion I had with, would it have been John Wagner, about what the four dark judges would look like. And I did send in a few alternative ideas for what they should look like, some of which were rejected, but we just settled on the way they looked. And when it came to Mortis, he ended up looking like that, didn't he? And that's the very thing that I found on a hillside in Cumbria, and that's Mortis's face.
I understand you don't use models too much or references too much.
Well, I was asked that because we do these podcasts. I'm afraid you're not the very first person I've spoken to in this form. But, I have been asked that, and I was wondering whether I was lying, because I do use. No, I think it's a 50-50 job, really. I mean, when it came to the Killing Joke cover, I just posed that pose because I didn't really know quite how you'd hold a camera. So I really and I had a mirror in front of me, so it was very convenient. But I've never used another human being as a model. I know some artists actually do have actual people pose for them. I think Adam Hughes, I may be libeling him, but slandering. One of those.
If it's spoken, it's slander.
It is.
Yeah.
I know Adam, so Adam, if I've got it wrong, but I think he occasionally uses a living model. But and as I said before, when I was drawing Wonder Woman, I was looking at beautiful faces in Vogue magazine and so on. Not directly swiping them, but I have done a few direct swipes from photographs. And when it comes to drawing hands, I always do this in a mirror or something or other. Nowadays, I actually take a photograph of a hand and put it on the screen of the computer over there, and so there's the hand. So it is kind of realistic.
Oh, because you work digitally now, so it's easier.
Well, yes, since 1997, I think I've been working in Photoshop. Yeah. So there are certain advantages. You can build things up in layers. You can put a layer over the top of the photograph if you want, and just rough it out in pencil, and you can put another layer on top of that. You fade out the pencil layer, and you put another layer over the top, and you can ink that. So you're still sort of penciling and inking the way you would.
The insane thing about that is that a lot of people, when they move from traditional media to digital, you can really see a shift in their style. But if anybody asked me when you shifted, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
No, I'm quite pleased with that, actually. I mean, the other day I was talking about to somebody, maybe Facebook or somewhere, I was talking about a couple of Invisibles covers I'd done. And I said, oh, that one was digital. And then I realized after I'd said it, no, actually, that was actually not digital. That was one because I remember airbrushing that thing. So in a way, I think my style is so rigidly fixed that even though I make the monumental change of going from working on paper to working in Photoshop, it still has to look the same. Although there is a tendency now, because you can blow the thing up, you can zoom in, to put a little bit too much detail in. And also, having discovered Photoshop and all this sort of thing, when I was doing Invisibles covers, I thought, well, I'll get really experimental here. I'll throw in sort of bits of actual photography, collage and bits and pieces, so you can tell in that case. But the way I draw really is pretty much the way I always have done. Yeah,
it's a very seamless transition. Do you ever feel tempted to go back to traditional media?
No, no, not at all. I mean, the people want me to do commissions, and I'm afraid I don't do them because my eyesight isn't good enough, for one thing. My hand, working on that scale, and also how actually my hand in front of the bloody drawing that I'm working on, I'm so not used to it because I work on a Wacom tablet which is down below, and the screen is there. So what I'm drawing is not obscured by my own hand.
Yeah. How steep was that learning curve?
Very well. The steepness of the learning curve was really to understand the technology. It was to understand what a JPEG was and what a bitmap was and all this technical stuff you've got to learn, and how to plug this into that and all that. But once I had, and a lot of my tutoring came from Dave Gibbons. He was the one who suggested I give it a try, and also Angus Mackay, who is a terrific artist and a brilliant sort of computer guy. And the two of them, and Angus's brother Ian Mackay, they helped me. I'd have some terrible problem I was having in Photoshop at midnight, so I would be able to ring those guys up and they would talk me through it.
See,
so it's I would say it was 10 months. It was about 10 months between actually buying the thing and being able to actually produce a piece of work on it.
Very, very, very interesting. Because see, you mentioned Dave, I feel like I can tell when he went digital.
You can.
I feel like his style changed just a little bit. Like his face has got a little browner and less angular.
Did he do the one about the that graphic novel he did about the scooter gang?
The originals.
The originals, was that digital?
I believe so, but
Okay.
I'll have to check on that.
Yeah.
Did you realize, well, how did it feel getting the assignment for Camelot 3000?
Oh, it was great because, DC Comics was my first love. I fell in love with DC. I mean, after Dinosaurus, I immediately went on to various DC mystery books, and I had complete collections of Flash, Green Lantern, Atom. I've said this before. So it was like Mecca, really. So, and I remember at school, I had to do a school composition. What was my greatest ambition in life? And it was to meet Gil Kane, who was the artist on those books, two of those. And of course I did,
Yeah.
at various conventions. Great guy. And well, I did a few covers for DC, and then they did realize that there was a little pool of talent in my country, in Britain, and they sent a few scouts over, and they gave me this job, which I knew was going to be a 2-year, full-time job for working at DC, which was a great thrill. Yeah.
And what was it like collaborating with Mike Barr across the Atlantic before the internet?
Well, that's right. I mean, all we had was the fax machine, so we didn't have the technology. I mean, I don't know quite how the Filipino guys, I assume, were living in the Philippines when they were working for DC and Warren and various places. Were they, or did
No,
they go
moved
over
to
there?
the States.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
So they didn't have to think about the technology of sort of getting it across the pond.
Yeah, because the Filipino invasion happened in 1972, which coincidentally is the year that our dictator instituted martial law in the Philippines, and you could literally get killed for making subversive artwork. Coincidentally. So a lot of people moved elsewhere.
So they moved?
Yeah.
Was that Marcos?
Yes.
Who was the dictator? Marcos, Imelda Marcos. What was his first name?
Ferdinand.
Ferdinand, yes.
Yeah.
I've learned something. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, it was nobody ever actually says that that's the reason that they moved, but I'm like, come on. How'd you collaborate without the internet and you had fax machines? There's for you children out there, fax machines are machines that sent documents.
Yeah. It was like a telephone that you could send pictures on. Amazing. What will they think of next? But yeah, it was great. I mean, I got to know Mike Barr over the phone, and he was a great guy. He came over to visit quite a few times. We went around Stonehenge together. In fact, we got permission from the English Heritage to actually, because now when you go to Stonehenge, you could only approach it with a circle, quite a wide circle around it. But we got permission to actually go into Stonehenge. And I have photographs of us kind of lurking around the stones. And I got very into the Neolithic prehistoric monoliths of my country, and all the prehistoric sites and that. But Mike Barr is a very funny guy, and we had lots of very funny conversations. And that was when I first discovered the differences between the words we use in British English and American English. Okay, there was one time when it said in the script that King Arthur is pissed. So I thought, well, because to us that means he's drunk, he's been drinking.
Oh yeah.
But in America, when you're pissed, it means you're cross. That was just the first encounter with the sort of the odd differences in language we have.
That's very interesting. That's also that's very interesting. Language stuff is always interesting because they're doing these Asterix translations now, and these new American English translations of Asterix, because the theory is that it never became big in America because the translations were in British English. So I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even think of them as two separate languages, but they.
Well, I mean, there is that famous saying that America and Britain are two nations separated by a single language, or something like that. But I mean, a lot of the time it's just differences in spelling. You know, we put a U in colour and labour and honour and things like that. But that's we mostly we understand each other.
Did you feel did you have any additional input in the story of Camelot 3000? Okay.
I did a bit more so than most of my other collaborations I've ever done. Mostly, if it's John Wagner, I get the script and I draw what he asks. And when it was Alan Moore, I got the script and I drew precisely what he asked for. But with Mike Barr, I think I came up with the idea that the aliens were like a hive, and they would have for some reason, they would have like a mother, a queen superior. I must have sort of come up with this massive insect-like brooding creature that was pregnant, multiply pregnant. And I think that was my suggestion, and he kind of liked the idea. So one or two of those elements towards the end, I think we were getting towards the end, and I was suggesting a few things, and he was quite open to them. I guess I did it.
Did he ask for your input, considering that you're a Brit, or?
Well, I think our phone conversations were pretty open. We rambled in all directions, and I think it must have just come up that I may have just suggested this. He didn't ask for it. I don't think he said, "What are we doing? Can you come up with the rest of the story?" I must have just said, "Oh, here's an idea, Mike. What about this?" And he went with it. Yeah.
Was there any pressure, knowing that this was the first direct market comic?
No. I think the only pressure was my problem with deadlines. The only pressure was getting it done. And I don't know whether you may know that the last two issues were so ridiculously late. I mean, the final issue was months and months late, and they had to re-advertise it.
You're not the only person guilty of that, though.
Right? Really? I don't know. Am I not? Who else is guilty of that?
I think Watchman was delayed. Yeah.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah, I believe so.
When we were doing, when Grant Morrison was doing The Invisibles, the final volume of The Invisibles were numbered from 12 to 1. The number system went backwards, and we were supposed to be numbering it up or down to the millennium. And the final issue, which was number 1, was supposed to come out at the crack of 2000 AD. But he missed that, and it was quite a bit later. So I guess you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of these tend to be late. I think even Dark Knight #4 was late or something.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with as you say, with the kind of new formats that were coming along in the 80s, the direct sales thing, I think there was a lot more flexibility with deadline. I think there's a lot more negotiation that goes on between the publishers and the retailers to some extent.
And it's one of those things, it's a debate that goes on in fan circles. It's like, all right, so if you were delayed on Camelot 3000, there would have been two options. One is to take your time and let you finish, and the other one is to get a fill-in. And I'm like, nobody wants a fill-in, right?
No.
Like, especially if you're going to be reprinting these things. Nobody's going to want to fill in on these. Just let them finish it.
Although apparently number 6, I believe, and I didn't know this until much later, Bruce Patterson, I think, was leaving with number 6. He was the inker of the first 6 issues, well, 5 issues really, and apparently they got all and sundry to ink that issue. My friend Joe Statham was telling me that they got this artist and that, and I think he even inked a few bits. And I think the janitor inked a few of the other pages. I guess to some extent that was a fill-in job.
I suppose that might count.
Yeah.
Camelot 3000. Did you have any particular favorite designs that you came up with for that series?
Yes, I love the covers. I mean, Terry Austin, I think, was always a bit annoyed with me, who he inked the final 6, that I insisted on penciling and inking all the covers. So I loved that. I thought they were quite. I enjoyed the covers. I think I've gradually, even when I was an interior comic book artist, I've always had an interest in the covers. I mean, when I had my collection, it was all in bags. So most of the time I was just looking at the covers and really enjoying them and not even looking inside. And I've forgotten exactly what your question was, but
Like your favorite designs that you came up with for.
Oh yes, yeah, I enjoyed the covers, but I've still got quite a few of the Camelots over there, and occasionally I pull one out and think, God, he was good.
Yes, you were, and you still are.
You can detect a kind of youthful, carefree enthusiasm. I mean, now it's bloody hard work trying to keep up a standard, but back in those days, I could see a kind of carefree looseness that came with the speed we were working at, which is very pleasant to look at. I think some pages really work quite well. I think.
I have to tell you, I didn't see Camelot until much later because I missed it.
It was before your time.
Yeah, but whenever I bought back issues of comics, there was always that house ad with a lady in the lake holding up Excalibur.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I was always like, I have to read this comic. This is such a cool ad. This is such a cool image. And
well, give me your address and I'll send you the whole set if you like.
No, I mean I have it now, but
you've got them now.
Yeah, I have them now. But when I was a kid, I was like, I have to read this comic. This is so cool. And then you had an entry in a Who's Who in the DC universe too, which I always thought your design for King Arthur was very cool, to the point where when you revisited him many years later in DC Legacies,
yes,
I was like, oh my God, Brian Bolland's drawing King Arthur again. That's so cool.
Well, that was Len Wein wrote that little story. It was an Atom time pool story, and I just agreed to draw. I said, I'd really like to draw a little Atom story. So he wrote this story. He didn't discuss it with me. This is Len Wein, and much to my horror, it had King Arthur in it. And I thought, I've been there, I've done that. I don't really want to go back and do that. So I changed his costume a little bit. But I wasn't delighted that I was suddenly drawing King Arthur again.
Oh wow! And I think we all just assumed that you asked for that.
No,
but that's interesting. I will only ask 3 questions about the Killing Joke.
Okay.
I promise.
I'll give you 3.
Okay. What do you think of it now?
Does the Joker die at the end?
No.
No. What was the question?
What do you think of it now?
1.
What do you think of the Killing Joke now?
Well, I've got so many feelings about the Killing Joke. It was intended to be me at my best. I just wanted it to be the best thing I could do. I thought it was not one of Alan's best stories. I think he wrote it under a little bit of duress. I think he was on the verge of falling out with DC and not really wanting to work in comics ever again. And I have a huge amount of gratitude that Alan was prepared to finish it, because he now doesn't really want to look at it. What do I think about it? I think it's a little bit, I mean, okay. There are parts of it that I love. I'm not sure I really thought it was necessary to harm Barbara Gordon in that way. It was drawn reasonably well in places. Then there was the whole issue with the color, which I still rankles with me. I'm going to be meeting John Higgins at a convention. We'll have to sit down together, because I sort of publicly said how much I dislike the color, I'm afraid, on the original, because I recolored it.
Yeah.
And then there's this this whole sadness I have that because Alan has exited the world of comics so thoroughly, I've lost a good old friend. He was one of the Brits that we always used to be very good pals, and I'm very sad not to have Alan as a pal anymore. So I get a bit of that.
Yeah, I'll take this out if you don't want me to put it in. But if did you have a falling out with Alan, or was that just the thing where he's just like, I'm done with comics?
No, I've never fallen out. We've always got on very well. I've always very much enjoyed Alan's company. He's a great story raconteur. He's a great storyteller when you know him personally. I just I have not heard from him. I understand he particularly fell out with DC Comics and other people, but we've never fallen out. But I assume I'm on his off list.
Maybe bad memories.
Possibly, yeah.
So here's my last question about the Killing Joke. Do you think?
Yeah, we had two.
Well, the other one was what's your relationship with Alan like now?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you think, because quite honestly, my answer to this is it annoys me. Do you think you got the short end of the stick with a Killing Joke? Because I feel like when Len Wein died and then Alan publicly denounced it, it's like people are like, all right, that's it. That's where, those are the people we're going to ask about the Killing Joke. And I'm like, there's like one other person who's heavily involved in this.
Yes. Well, it was my project, you see, because after Camelot, I spoke to Dick Giordano at 2000 AD and said, what can I do for you next? And he said, well, you can do anything you like. And I said, well, I'd love to do a graphic novel, and I'd love with the Joker, and I'd love Alan Moore to write it. So all of those people were gathered thanks to my request. So in a way, it was my Killing Joke. It sounds a little bit arrogant, this, but recently I was reading in The Guardian, and you may have already heard this, but I was reading in The Guardian, and the headline of the piece was Alan Moore's controversial Batman comic, and it was about the fact that violence against women is a common factor in comics, and it covered that, and how Alan really had, I suppose, turned his back on it and all of comics, and at no point was my name in there at all. It was Alan Moore's Batman comic. It wasn't anything to do with me. I just so I know what you mean. Yes. Often, I think in the world of words, that sounds a funny sort of expression, but in the world of words, people do tend to talk about the stories. Talking about art is really only something that fellow artists have the language for, to some extent. Usually at some stage in an interview, I have to drop the bombshell that I was never a big fan of Jack Kirby. And it's at that point people say, right, the interview's over, or, my career is over. But I never really fell in love with Jack Kirby because his anatomy is all wrong. But I mean, he's almost like above that. It doesn't really matter that he doesn't seem to have deltoids and pectoids and all those muscles in the right place. He just puts a big line there and a big line there. I mean, it's all about movement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And being a little bit OCD myself, I just can't somehow get my head around that.
I somehow knew that you weren't a big fan of Jack Kirby, but
yeah.
I feel like it's a common thing that a lot of people tend to not be big fans of Jack Kirby at first.
You mean it's a thing that grows on you?
Yeah, because there's
you? Are you a big fan? What about you?
I eventually became a fan,
yeah.
a big fan, especially of his work on Thor.
Yeah.
But I remember in the 90s, they released The Coming of Galactus in a small little trade. And I remember reading it and being like, God, this is ugly. But then I kept on rereading it and rereading it and rereading it. And I thought, like, wait, if I think this is ugly, why do I keep rereading this?
Well, those are astonishing worlds he creates. Those astonishing, the machinery. I can never draw machinery, it takes me forever. But all those kind of wonderful sort of Galactus himself with all the stuff around his hat and all those great worlds he creates are very impressive. I mean, I knew Jack. You see, my collection, after I started collecting in age 10, I then had a little bit of money, and I was able to go back right through the 50s and collect back issues of House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Tales of the Unexpected, My Greatest Adventure, all of which were DC pre-superhero comics, and Jack Kirby was in quite a few of those. And so I saw him as just one of the jobbing artists of the time.
Yeah.
And of course, he did the first 8 issues or so of Challenges of the Unknown. Yes. Before going over to Marvel. And he didn't really stand out. I mean, it was a nice, it was very distinctive, and he had a nice clean line, but I wouldn't have guessed if at the time that he was going to be the one that was going to completely make Marvel Comics, which is really the dominant style, really, isn't it?
My hot take is that even in the Marvel Age of Comics, and I suspect you might agree with me on this, is I actually like Steve Ditko better.
Yeah, yes, I actually had some Spider-Mans. I bought Spider-Mans, a few, and I loved, didn't he draw Doctor Strange as well? I loved his, in the psychedelic 60s, I rather liked his Doctor Strange. Was Dormammu in there? And the Living Tribunal. Yeah. Wonderful character.
And Eternity.
Yeah. Eternity, yeah. He was like a kind of a black silhouette with space inside of him, wasn't he?
He was just the universe.
Oh, right.
I thought that was it's just he drew weird, and he drew weird stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool.
And I met him briefly once.
Oh, what's he like?
He well, DC had these when they had studios in offices in New York. There'd be these empty corridors with doors leading off into various people's rooms. And in one of the corridors, they had a bank of all this month's covers all stuck on the wall. So you could see all 30 or whatever issues they brought out. And I walked along the corridor with my friend, Joe Staten, and there was this gentleman in a rather smart suit and glasses standing there looking at this wall. And Joe said, "Brian, let me introduce you to Steve Ditko." And he was very quiet, very pleasant and nice. And if I'd known he was going to be such an enigma in later life, I would have taken a photo of him or had a selfie or something. But it was a very brief conversation we had. Didn't go greatly.
That's very cool. You have created some very iconic covers. And I was wondering if you had a principle to how you come up with covers, because I think a lot of people think that, there are general rules, like the cover has to show what's going on in the book, or the cover has to be action packed, or some people are like, oh, the cover just has to look good and be a pinup. You've managed to do all of that.
Okay. Well, I think you've covered all the rules in your list of rules.
But how do you select which direction to go?
Well, when I was buying the DC comics, it did tend to be the case that the cover would often pretty much explain the entire. If you look at adventure comics or action with Superman or Superboy, generally there was something strange going on, and there'd be a lot of text up there and thought balloons, and they would be saying, "Oh dear, Jimmy Olsen's turning into a giant porcupine," or something like that, and that would be the story. But that style has really gone out the window. You don't get word balloons and story descriptions on covers anymore. It really is more pin-ups now, isn't it? Because now we have these things called variant covers, where a retailer gets to sponsor a special edition of this particular issue. I've done 3 Swamp Thing covers, yeah. I forgot what I was talking about there. Oh yes, and so often somebody says, "Look, will you do a variant cover for Swamp Thing or something or other?" And I'll say, "Yeah, what do you want on there?" And I get some idea of what's going on in the story, but pretty much I'm let loose to do whatever I like without having read the story. Sometimes I get to see some of the interior art. But you do get a feel for what sort of image will arrest the eye. I think my sort of work, since my work is very technically okay and precise, you can see fairly clearly. Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a few 2000 AD covers recently, and when you look at them, you discover that there's a spaceship over there, and there's something going on, and there's an explosion over here, and there's some people down there. But when you look at it from a distance, you don't know what's going on. You have to really struggle to. With mine, I feel that you need to know what's going on from quite a long way away. So it can be very detailed, but the thing that's going on has got to be fairly easy to pick up. I mean, there is this thing I was talking about, this bank of covers that they used to put on the wall. Occasionally in Photoshop, you can put like 100 covers together and just look at them. And it's interesting, the ones that stand out. And they often have, as I say, quite a simple, distinctive thing going on. An uncluttered looking incident on the cover. But also there's got to be a catch somewhere. There's got to be a hook that makes you think, oh, I've never seen that before. I do a lot of portrait covers. I'm very interested in the performance of the people in the stories. So I often do a lot of portrait type covers. I did a Batman, it was Detective Number 1000 recently, which just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters just sort of posing for the camera, basically. Yeah. So there are a few things like that I do.
Would you say The Killing Joke is your most famous cover?
Well, I would say so, in as much as the sheer volume of sales. You know, it's always been on sale, I think, hasn't it? And it's been copied a few times too, I guess.
And that's an example that I was talking about, is that, like, yes, at some point in the story, Joker does hold a camera, but it's just, nobody would know, like, anyone else doing a cover where somebody's just holding a camera. I'm not so sure it would look as good, or it would be as captivating, or if it would sell, but like with you, it's like, it's an iconic image. So
yes, I mean, the image just was a gift. You know, I don't remember anybody telling me what to put on the cover, but it just was such the obvious thing to have on the cover. Alan didn't suggest it, and Len Wein, I think, had left the project by then, or had he? I can't remember. Denny O'Neill took it over, I believe. But the cover just came to me, and I did a very finished, coloured rough of it, which is, you can see somewhere or other. But it was only afterwards that I realized that it was actually the most ghastly moment in the story. It is the moment where whatever the Joker has done to Barbara, this is the moment, the cover moment, which is like a jolly sort of thing. Oh, here's the Joker taking a photograph of you. But it's actually the moment when he's committed his worst deed in the story, off camera.
Terrible. But it's just a captivating thing, because you want to know what the Joker's taking a picture of, or even if you think the Joker's taking a picture of you, it's scary.
Yeah, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, for me, I want to say the first cover I ever saw you draw, it was a Superman annual. Superman just squeezing the hand, like doing this hand wrestling thing with Luthor's armor.
Oh yes. Oh, you saw that one? Yeah. I think occasionally I would go to DC in New York and spend a few days there, and that was one of the ones I think I drew on the table at the DC offices. Yeah.
Wow, and Luthor is over there in the back, being like, and I remember back then I was just hooked, and I had to read this comic because I'm like, I was, I had the superpowers toys, and I knew that was Luthor's armor, but that's Luthor out there. It's just such an easy book,
Right. I'm not sure I ever read it. When I first started doing covers for DC, Ross Andrew, who was a veteran artist, and I think he actually had a desk job at DC at the time in the late 70s and early 80s. I don't know whether he was art director or something, but he actually did the roughs for some of my earliest covers. So that one with the Superman doing that with an off-camera person was from a Ross Andrews sketch.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But
In
another one
fact,
is
the first two Camelot covers were also from Ross Andrews sketches.
yeah, that part that one I knew. And I knew you liked Ross Andrew growing up, right? Or
Oh, I loved Ross Andrew. Yeah, I loved his Metal Man. Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito drew Metal Man. They were never very well suited to other jobs. They, when Carmine Infantino left The Flash after drawing hundreds of issues, other artists had a go at drawing The Flash, and Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito, they always worked as a team, took over for a bit, and nobody liked their version. So they were very well suited to Metal Man. And previously they'd done a lot of Wonder Woman. But yeah, I did like him quite a bit. But you know, when it came to Camelot, I'd spent 5 years as a professional comic artist, and I rather resented that they didn't trust me enough to come up with my own cover ideas. So I said, no, I want to do them myself. I don't need Ross to.
Do you think that resentment helped you make the rest of the Camelot 3000 covers so good?
Well, I think resentment. I mean, hearing you say the word, it's a bit strong. I didn't really. It was. I was arrogant enough to think I shouldn't be sort of being guided by someone else. I'm quite capable of doing it myself.
Yeah.
But the answer to your question is probably yes.
Another cover that really struck out to me. It was Superman. Clark Kent just giving a report to the camera, except he's a robot.
Yes.
Like, what an image.
Well, yeah, I don't know where these images come from, but Julius Schwartz was also a veteran editor at DC, and Julie, as we called him, befriended Dave Gibbons and me. And when I was on my way to visit, he would always say, draw a couple of covers, you know. Pretty much gave me carte blanche to do anything. And that one with Clark Kent as a robot with his head blowing up. And also another one where Superman is like a beast. Once I just drew, and he just took them off me and said, that's fine.
Yeah, that one gets shown in a lot of like lists of Brian Bolland's best covers.
Yeah, he decided to do it without any color. It was you know, mostly I would be working in ink on ink line, and then there would be colorists. Often it was Tatiana Wood. What was her name? Adrienne Roy, I think was her name.
Adrienne Roy, yeah.
Yes, Tollin as she became. But in this case, they printed the thing as just line. I think his eyes were red.
You also changed the course of Starro forever, and
well,
that was a huge thing this past summer.
I was so delighted to see Starro the Conqueror in the Suicide Squad movie, and I thought, as you say, I'm responsible for that, because he was on the cover of the very first Justice League comic in Brave and the Bold in 1960.
Yeah, and
there's something very iconic, you know, about that image, but not a very practical villain, really, a giant starfish. So he hadn't. I mean, I've got a love of the ridiculous. I mean, you know, hence my love of the crazies that are in 2000 AD with Judge Dredd. But he hadn't reappeared for 20 years. I don't think he may have done. I don't know. But I decided it was one of those occasions when Julie said you can draw anything you like. So I put Starro on the cover.
You had him do the.
Yes, I did the alien face hugger thing with him, and Julie liked that and got me to do another one. And I don't know who drew the inside of that issue, but I think recently the film people must have been looking for the most ridiculous characters so they can kill a few off in the movie. But
Starro in the movie is so, you know, one, he's cute. So.
I really liked, actually, the thing about Starro, the way he was drawn originally, and the way I drew him, he had, somebody said, why has he got a Captain America shield in the middle of his person?
It's his eye.
Well, it's his eye, but it looks more like, it's just a series of red and white rings in the comic. But in the movie, it actually had an eye that moved around, which I thought looked rather cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and he did that whole face hugger thing, and then they did that whole line at the end.
They did, yeah.
It's a one.
And somebody said that my name was at the end of the credits. You could just make out my name about there on the screen, along with 50 other people.
It was,
so
yeah.
It was quite nice.
Very cool. You also did a lengthy run of covers on Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Lots of iconic images there. You had Wonder Woman as the Joker, but I think your most famous Wonder Woman image is probably the one where she's standing and,
on one leg.
On one leg, yeah, to the side.
Yeah, it worries me every time I look at that image. I sort of think, God, that leg must be hurting by now. She's been standing like that for 25 years.
And they made a statue out of that too.
Yes, they did. Yes, I think I have it here somewhere. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yes. So that's an example of a cover that doesn't really show what's going on in the comic, but it looks so good, so you put it on the cover, right?
Yeah. Well, there are occasions when you're completely stuck for an idea, and neither I nor the editor have a clue what to put on the cover. So I just do a pin-up. And they often turn out to be the ones that, I mean, the very first one I drew was just basically her looking to camera, holding a lasso or whatever, and saying, I'm back. And it does look kind of iconic in a way. But
yes,
as I say, usually the ones that don't have an idea at all are the ones that tend to stick in your mind.
You designed the unpowered Wonder Woman costume, right?
I did, yes.
I have a question about that. My question is, does her hair magically straighten when she wears that costume?
She spends a long time with kind of heaters trying to get her hair straight.
Because
it's probably a wig.
It seems like a waste of time, Diana, to do it manual.
You should be out there fighting evil and not straightening your hair, getting your hair cut. I have no idea that through her history, they put Wonder Woman in various different costumes. I mean, in the, I guess it was the late 60s, during the sort of Carnaby Street era, they tried to put all these superheroes in kind of 60s Carnaby Street type flare trousers and whatever. And I think later on, she's been in various different, I have no idea where they asked me to redesign her costume. What the hell was behind that? I have no idea. But for some reason, I did redesign the cover, but the costume, based on something that I think, a Vogue model of the time, and I can't remember her name. It's not coming to me. She was wearing a Versace outfit that had lots of buckles and things on it. A little bit of leather. I think I must have seen that. But Mike Deodato, from Brazil, drew those issues, and I think he drew that first cover too.
He kind of just ran with that. Did you work closely? Do you work closely with editors and the writers when you do these covers, or do they kind of leave you alone?
It varies. When I've done long runs I did a very long run on Animal Man, and I did a long run on The Invisibles. I got to know the editors. The editor of The Invisibles was Shelley Bond. And Shelley Bond is a terrific editor to work with. Whenever I put in a piece of work, she would always praise it to the hilt or whatever. And you almost wouldn't need to be paid. All you need is to be praised like that by Shelley. It was like she would see details in it which I may not have noticed, and sort of praise these particular details, and you could spend half an hour enjoying the praise. I can't remember when she ever told me it was crap, but we got on very, very well. so in that sense, and I remember when I first started using the computer, I was able to use little bits of photography here and there on those covers, and I found a photograph of Shelley, and she had her hair was red at the time, I think, and I put her head very, very tiny as a fruit in a tree in the background, I think, but it ended up a little too small for you to actually see. Yeah, you do tend to get work up a relationship with an editor. Yeah,
I love your Animal Man covers. They're all so iconic. They all really stick with me. That's another one. I saw the ad for Animal Man #1, which is just a cover to Animal Man #1 anyway. And I realized I have to read this comic.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that was that again was another kind of pin-up cover, because I didn't know what was going to happen in the stories, so I just had him running towards the camera with some animals back there. Yeah. But again, later on, we almost were able to bring the wackiness of a 2000 AD cover or an Eagle reprint of the 2000 AD Judge Dredd stories. The sort of strangeness of those onto the covers of some of the later issues of Animal Man. I think that was Grant Morrison for a long time, but then I think, what was the other writer of that? But anyway, I think Jamie Delano did some.
Yeah,
Peter Milligan took over, I think, from Grant Morrison, and I was able to do some very interesting, strange covers on that.
Yeah, when I think I feel like that kind of might have started when Grant started doing that whole we're all in a comic book thing, because you started doing playing around with that.
Yes, there was a bit of that. Yeah. But there was one cover I loved doing. I think it was a Peter Milligan story, and there were two very strange characters scrapping. Oh, it was Animal Man fighting with a man that was made out of newspaper.
I remember this. Yeah.
Yes. And if you read all the newspaper headlines all over this character's body, it will be all stuff to do with the editors, the actual the editor was arrested or something.
I always
I think one of them said artist seeks pay rise.
I always love when you do characters like that, because a lot of the time what happens is the interior artist ends up being less detailed than you, a little bit more cartoony.
Well, they have got to turn out the pages, haven't they? You couldn't put that kind of detail inside really so much, could you? Yeah,
it's not a knock on them, but it's just, they'll do these renditions, and then all of a sudden you'll draw it in your very realistic, naturalistic rendition, and I'm like, and now I realize how silly this character is. Like when you were doing the Flash, when you were doing your run on the Flash, I'm like, whenever you drew the Mirror Master, for example, I'm like, oh, that's what he would look like if he was real.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
I did a very silly cover on the Trickster. There was one where the Trickster, who had a new look, he was running backwards or something, and his fake hand had come off, and the Flash was holding his fake hand, which had obviously blown up in his face, and his face was like a comedy. The way in cartoons the face would be blackened. Yeah, and you just see the eyes, and that maybe if they had hair, the hair would be standing out. But it looked like something off the cover of Mad magazine. I thought, I love that one. See, the very first Silver Age comic, some say, was Showcase #4 from 1957, or is it 6? 1955. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's the Flash running out of a strip of film, of celluloid film, and I've copied that cover a number of times. We did DR and Quinch, who were Alan Moore characters from 2000 AD, and one of the covers was them running out of that same strip of film. And I also did a Flash collected edition that had the same image, but with the modern versions of Flash running towards the camera.
You did it for the return of Barry Allen.
Did I?
Yeah, that's the one for the trade paperback of the Return of Barry Allen.
Yeah.
It has Wally in the film strip, and then Barry Allen coming out of it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your memory is much better than mine.
Well, I'll tell you why that one sticks out to me. Because when I was very, very young, I had an action figure of Barry Allen.
Did you?
And then later on, like not too long after that, they killed Barry Allen. So I, as a disgruntled 5-year-old fan, refused to read anything with Wally West in it.
Really? Is Wally West currently the Flash?
I think they're both the Flash right now.
Oh, is he back? Is Barry back? Is he?
Yeah. So I refused to read anything with Wally West in it. And then one day I saw that collected edition that you drew, and I'm like, oh, it's the Return of Barry Allen, and they're doing this riff on Showcase number 4, and I have to read this because Barry Allen is back. And then I bought it, I read it, and I became a fan of Wally West. So you, sir, pulled a Trojan horse on me.
Oh, well, there you go. I've ruined your life. Condemned you to poverty.
all of the comics that you've drawn, all of the covers that you've drawn, are there particular ones that really stick out to you? Like maybe 3 covers that stick out to you? You're really proud of?
It's hard to say. I mean, I did actually count how many covers I've drawn for DC, and it was about 430. I thought it might have been more, but it was about 430, 450 possibly. And of course, I've done quite a few for other people as well. So it's kind of hard to say a favorite. I mean, recently I've drawn, you see, some of the ideas I came up with for Animal Man, I was often drawing 2 or 3 ideas on paper and faxing them to my editor for them to say, no, we like this one. And often I preferred that one. So recently I actually finished 3 Animal Man covers, which were rejected at the first time round, which you can see online. I'll send them to you. And I really liked them. There was, one of them had the Inferior 5 on the front. I never had a chance to draw the Inferior 5. But
I love them.
Wall, I don't know whether there's a way of reversing the camera on this, is there? But it's actually on the wall over there. I'll send you a link. And so I had because now I'm kind of retired, I had the time to draw these 3 Animal Man covers. One was the Inferior 5. One of them had Metamorpho, an elongated man fighting a dinosaur. And one of them was set in Beastville or something. It had this kind of beastly, sort of, a bit like The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. It had that kind of vibe about it. And they are my favorites, but they've never been published. But amongst the published ones, one of my real favorites was an Animal Man where there was a monkey sitting at a typewriter.
Yes.
Just a completely white cover with a monkey at a typewriter. And what he's typing is the script, is Grant Morrison's actual script for the Interior story. Because it's a riff on, if you had enough monkeys, an infinite number of monkeys, they would one of them would write the entire works of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of a cheeky thing.
I love that cover. You have so many great images there.
Now, one of the things I do rather like is the fact that occasionally, quite frequently in my case, the lead character in that issue is not on the cover. Like I was drawing Gotham Knights covers, and quite often Batman wouldn't be on the cover. It was somebody else. Yeah. Yeah,
and you had that one too with I think it was Commissioner Gordon and Two-Face looking at each other.
That's right. There was a mirror thing. It was Two-Face and Commissioner Gordon, and I had sort of multiple images of one half of him was Two-Face. I think the other half of him was Commissioner Gordon, and then you saw them in the mirror, and then there was another mirror over there. Where that idea? I must have been told to do that because I can't imagine knowing what the hell was going on in the story.
Do you ask for certain characters that you, to draw covers for? Or do you ask to work with
Yeah.
people like Grant Morrison or?
No. I had met back in that time. I had met Grant Morrison, and he'd done some things for 2000 AD, but I didn't know him very well. And I had no idea he was going to be mega the way he did become. So back in that day, he was just another guy, like the rest of us. The only thing I could, well, but back at the time, I would get a phone call, and they'd say, "Will you draw?" Well, they'd say, could you draw Animal Man for me?" And I'd say, "Well, I really couldn't possibly, because I've got all this work off." And they would say, "Well, can you just do the cover?" So a lot of the time, I was getting work offers, but I only had time to do the cover, and that's why I gradually became just a cover artist. And mostly it's because people ask me. They sometimes ask me to do things that are just so not suited to me that it's a strain. But the only exception to this was I really fancied drawing Wonder Woman. I knew, given the opportunity, I could draw a beautiful Wonder Woman if possible. So I asked Paul Kupperberg, I think, somebody like that, was it Tom Pyre? I said, "I'd really love to draw covers on Wonder Woman." They said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I did ask for Wonder Woman, yeah.
You
One of my favorite covers that never happened was one. It was the Joker was in the issue, and Wonder Woman's over there looking, and the Joker has got his back to us, and he's got his Macintosh coat open like a flasher, and she's going, "Oh," but you don't know what he's showing her. So for all your imagination works in your mind, that he's actually flashing his cock to Wonder Woman, but in fact he had a vest with explosives on.
Yeah.
If you read the story, and I thought that would have made a fantastic cover, and but they turned it down. It was too rude.
Yeah, they went with.
I think I have drawn that in a completed form, like for a fan or something.
Oh, very cool. They did do that in a. They went with a more straightforward cover on that one.
Yes, it was. The Joker was looking more towards her, and she was looking at him. I think with the vest of explosives actually on view. Yes, so it kind of lost something.
I think another one, another cover that people don't really talk about this book much. And I was surprised that you did the cover for it, because I don't think you're known for humor, but Batman Superman World's Funnest. You did a cover for that one, and I'm like,
yes,
I just all of these different versions of Batman and Superman, and the thing that struck me, aside from your renditions of Batmite and Mixospitalik, is you had a version of Michael Keaton's Batman on it.
Did I?
That just looked exactly like Michael Keaton's Batman. Like,
really?
Yeah. Well, it's just all of the black, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, that was in the digital era. I think that was done in Photoshop, so I must have had access to Google or something. So I was able to find various versions of that. And where possible, I really like it to look as if Dick Sprang had drawn it. Or I've done a couple of Doom Patrol collected edition covers where I've pretty much swiped Bruno Premiani's actual Robot Man and Elastigirl and Beast Boy, and just sort of collaged them together in a slightly different way, because I wanted the cover to have been drawn by Bruno Premiani, who was long dead.
Yeah.
I do occasionally like to try to ape the style of another period. Yeah.
You do that, right? Like you drew the cover to Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow for the trade paperback, but you you kind of drew it in the exact same layout that Kurt Swan did, but it's clearly you.
Yes, that was an occasion where I just used the original cover as a layout, but I drew it in my way, and I think I resized all the standing figures on the ground. But it was the roof of the Daily Planet, wasn't it, that was sort of waving him goodbye. Yeah, that's right. But occasionally I've pretty much ruthlessly swiped Kurt Swan and George Klein, or whoever was the inker at the time, and put them to. I did one which was a Jimmy Olsen's weird metamorphoses issue. So I was able to draw the giant porcupine Jimmy and the sort of fat Jimmy and the alien Jimmy, and they were and a werewolf Jimmy, which I pretty much swiped from an issue of Jimmy Olsen. But you end up drawing every single line. It's not, it's still quite a lot of work to do. But
of course,
it's thinking, wouldn't it be nice if he was still around and still drawing this stuff?
And speaking of swipes, and I'd like to get your point of view on this. 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, you had a very public, I don't want to say altercation, with a ripoff artist named Erro.
Oh, Erro, the Erro thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when is a swipe acceptable and when is it not?
That's interesting. I mean, who am I to have a go at Erro for swiping me when I've been swiping Bruno Premiani and Kurt Swan? Well, I think in the case of Erro, because I wrote a long public letter explaining why I thought it was wrong. And I think it's because what was going on, it was a kind of colonialism. It was like somebody from the world of high art is coming down into the colonies of the gutter literature and finding rubbish and magically transforming it into art. And it's kind of insulting because, the only part of my Tank Girl cover that he didn't copy was my name, which was written on my cover. And he was selling prints of this thing. I mean, it did have at least a third of his image contained some figures he'd taken from Chinese social realist art or something, whatever you call that. So there was additional stuff on there, but pretty much the whole of my Tank Girl cover for issue number 1 in the DC reprint, he'd copied. And I don't sort of mind that, but the fact that he had taken this stuff, almost by implication, it was not worth noticing, and elevated it to this high status as art, pissed me right off. And so I went and met him because I wrote the letter, and I think he must have read it, and we got together in Paris, and he took me out to dinner. He just said he would destroy all the prints, and we came to a kind of settlement. But I still think the whole idea of doing that rankles with me. Whereas I think when I was trying to get a Bruno Premiani cover on a Doom Patrol cover, even though he was now dead, to me doesn't seem quite as insulting.
Because yours is a tribute.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm pretty much reminding people that what a great artist he was.
Yeah, you're honoring Bruno Premiani.
Not trampling over him, yes.
It's I feel like would it have been fair to call Erro a modern day Roy Lichtenstein?
Oh yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you've probably read what all the things that people in the comics world have said about what they think of Roy Lichtenstein. I think one of the things as well that I find is that people like that find a shtick. They find an idea that works and they make a career out of it. And I mean, I do like a lot of contemporary art of all kinds, right across the range of art. Ai Weiwei, fantastic artist. Are you familiar with the Chinese artist? But in the case of Lichtenstein, he just came up with one idea. He pretty much stuck with it for his whole career. And that as well, I don't find interesting.
Do you ever see the one Roy Lichtenstein piece that's actually a comic because it's 2 panels? It's ridiculous. No. So it's a person pressing down on a trash bin to open it.
Yeah.
Except that the foot doesn't move it's still in the same angle in both. And I'm like, you actually have to press. I'm like, you have to press, Roy, for it to open.
Well, he wouldn't care about that, would he, really? I mean, he's more concerned with getting dots in the right place, isn't he? No, he's not a favorite artist. And I think that Wham painting, that was original. Was that Russ Heath?
Russ Heath.
Russ Heath, was it? Yeah, okay. Or yeah, it might have been Russ Heath.
Yeah, it was Russ Heath.
Yeah.
Here's my last question. Can you tell our viewers about a particular strip that you do on occasion that is based on a colloquialism?
You mean The Actress and the Bishop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, how many people get to say, like, oh, I'm just going to make this one saying into a long-running comic strip?
Okay, viewers. If somebody says in English, if somebody says something which could be interpreted as being rude, somebody might say, as the actress said to the bishop. It's a sort of very common and familiar term, which you probably don't really hear so much these days. And one day I was doing a set of prints for a French publisher, Editions Deus, and I drew this decrepit old bishop with a rather beautiful raven-haired woman with him. And Gary Leach and Phil Elliott, I think, came up with an anthology comic, a sort of self-published, published by writers and editors in the field, called A1, and they asked me to draw a 3-page story, which I could also write, and I had no experience of writing anything. But there were these two characters, the actress and the bishop, and I thought, well, maybe I should find out about them, because when you write a story, you're finding out about it. I mean, they do say that characters tend to write themselves. You start them off, and the story sort of evolves. And I saw them, since the kind of dirtiness of the thought of the actress and the bishop in your mind is there already. If you wrote a story which is completely innocent, really, almost, and I see them more as the actress and as the Owl and the Pussycat from, was it Edward Lear, going to sea in a pea green boat. They have these completely innocent, innocuous adventures while being an actress and a bishop, looking in all the regalia of a bishop with a mitre.
Yeah.
And she's like somebody from the Folie Bergère. She's got the plumes and the legs and everything. And they are some of my favourite characters. And I do the whole thing in rhyme, in sort of 4-line rhyme, which is a fairly strict regime to stick to.
Is that a challenge?
No, it's not. I really enjoy it. When I get sort of into that mindset, I find like I'm on the lawnmower, mowing the lawn, and these rhymes just sort of come into my head. You start thinking in rhyme, and the rhymes tend to get written way ahead of drawing the thing. I've got one called The Actress and the Bishop Go Shopping, which I would have liked to have brought out for Halloween, because it has a sort of Halloween theme in it, which is, I don't know how many verses there are in it, but I haven't started that one yet. But I've put it out in public because people can read these rhymes on their own. You can read them. They're just as entertaining without the pictures. But the previous one, The Actress and the Bishop Go to the Seaside, was a 20-page story where they go off in their little car and it breaks down, of course. So go out and find it, folks.
Yeah, you guys can find it in a Bolland strips, you also post about it on Facebook.
Yes, it is on Facebook, and I think I've put it on Instagram as well, if you could dig around for it. But I haven't actually got a publisher for it in print, but that would be nice, for those of you who don't have access to Facebook.
I'm not sure if I do follow you on Instagram. I think I'll have to check on that.
Yeah, I just put piles of my artwork on Instagram with no commentary and in completely random order. Whenever I find a piece that in a drawer somewhere that I haven't seen for years, I think, oh, oh, look at that. And I put it on Instagram in completely random order. Yeah.
Mr. Brian Bolland, thank you so much for joining the Comics Cube. This has been so educational, so insightful.
It's been really fun, and I've really enjoyed your company, actually, and your questions. And yeah, it's been great fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Happily.